Hey, I'm Dr. Steve Accavelli, known as the Gay Leadership Dude, and you are here on the Shadows Podcast.
Hey, Shadows listeners. If you're looking to make some extra income that also impacts people, then you need to look at becoming a certified leadership coach with Giant. If you don't already know, Giant has been in the leadership space for over 13 years. I got certified through Giant in 2018, and I've been teaching ever since. Just to give you some context, they used to own and operate the John Maxwell brands. They ran the LeaderCast conferences where Jim Collins, Henry Cloud, Malcolm Gladwell, and Simon Sinek, just to name a few, were regular speakers. They have over 500 coaches worldwide, working in over 127 countries, and are being hired by companies like Google, Chick-fil-A, Pfizer, Delta, and more. And yes, you can do this too. I know this might sound intimidating, but Giant will literally give you everything you need to start your own coaching business from scratch. You get hands-on training from top-level coaches to learn the exact methodology and tools that six-figure coaches are using. You get an all-in-one online platform to run your entire coaching business, even if you want to work 100% remotely. And you'll get to join a thriving community of coaches from all around the world. To get started, Giant is hosting a coaching business workshop to help you learn the ins and outs of how to build a successful coaching business. This is both for experienced coaches, consultants, and those who are looking to start coaching and consulting with little to no experience. If you want to hear the really good news, this whole workshop, it's free, 100% free. And you can reserve your spot by going to giant.tv/shadows. Why not give it a shot? What's better than making a positive change in people's lives and making some extra money in the process? Giant launches a new hiring cohort every month. Now, they only have 20 coaching slots available each month, so it's first come, first serve. So go ahead and make sure you reserve your spot. If you're ready to make an impact and get paid doing it, go to giant.tv/shadows, giant.tv/shadows.
Yo, welcome to episode 50 of the Shadows Podcast. I'm Joe Bogdan. I'm joined by Dub Scott Greene, 2/4 of the Llama Leadership team, or 1/2, however you want to say it. And all of us together host the Llama Lounge Podcast. And no, ladies and gentlemen, you have not made a mistake. This is indeed the Shadows Podcast, and we have conducted a hostile takeover. What's up, Scott?
Hey, it's nice in here.
It is. It's better than our place, man. What's going on?
I'm, just hanging out. He's got bean bags in here. This is comfortable. It's more of a lounge than what we have.
Yeah, there's a lot more buttons to push in here too. It's kind of nice.
That's true. Yeah, very high tech. I'm doing well, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. You know what I also noticed? It smells younger in here.
It does.
Like the room smells like a younger person normally in here.
Like Axe body spray or something like that.
Yeah. Like Frost Tips and Axe body spray. Yeah,
that's right. Probably some Limp Bizkit being played somewhere.
Yeah. What you up to, Scott?
Just hanging out on a beautiful Saturday afternoon here in Corpus Christi, Texas. It's actually sunshiny. For the first time in about a week. We've had downpours all week, so now it's kind of nice to get some beautiful weather going.
Yeah, it's 110 degrees right now in Vacaville, man. It's just wrong.
I'm just dry heat.
Yeah. I'm just praying that the power stays on, man. I really am, because when it gets hot, you start getting these rolling blackouts, and it happens pretty often around here. So we need this AC to stay on.
Have you guys had any issues with fires up there lately, or?
Yeah, on and off, but nothing like last year. Knock on wood, not yet. But last year was the craziest thing I've ever seen. It looked like Mad Max out there.
Yeah, we've just been flooded out here. Because it's a coastal area, so it's kind of low lying. So when it rains, 4 or 5 days in a row, we get some flooding. But I'm sure people didn't tune in to the Shadows podcast to hear us talk about the weather.
You don't think so?
Well, somebody might have. Yeah.
All right. Well, today we have a very special guest, and we decided to do this a little different than on the normal Shadows podcast format. Our special guest is the host of the Shadows podcast, Tripp Bodenheimer. What's up, Bodie?
What's going on? I felt like I got locked out of my room here for a minute.
Yeah. Well, we changed the locks. We'll change it back. We promise.
We're moving
the
furniture
body
around.
Spray and the My Way Limp Biscuit is me.
I knew it. So, how you been, Bodie?
Good. We just started a brand new class down here in Gunter, and it's our second one back in residence since teaching virtual for the past year and a half. So it's really nice to get some face-to-face interaction with people again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You remember how to do that?
It took a while. It took me a couple of days, but it's I'm definitely loving it.
It's refreshing.
You don't realize either how like draining it is staring at a computer screen all day
It is.
long.
It is.
Teaching to a computer screen, and then you get in front of people, and it's like a whole nother level of drain. It's like you get the drain later on in the afternoon, but at the moment it's like you're up on stage performing, and then when you get home, it's just zapped.
Yeah, and you got to have pants on the whole time too. So
that's the other thing. I might have to put my boots on. And
Yeah.
Now it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, you got to break into boots again.
Yeah,
I know. Your feet are all like, "What are you doing right now?"
My feet are like, "What are these boots again?"
And you have to tone down the body spray when you're back at work.
I do. Well, it's actually funny y'all said Axe, because when we were teaching right before the pandemic, I left my cologne and all that stuff at home, and I had a can of Axe body spray from the shopette, and I came in and everybody called me out on it. They were like, "You smell like a guy's locker room. You smell wear an Axe or something today."
Yeah.
Never wore it since.
They're like, "Are you like, an adult or?"
Yeah, exactly. Well, sir, are you going through a midlife crisis or something?
I remember back in the day for me, for all of us that were back when I was in the dorms, it was like,
okay, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Joop, is that the name of it? Joop cologne?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
There's all these colognes that I'm sure we all stunk. Like we all smelled like sweat and oil or something. Yeah.
I think when you were in the dorms, I was probably like 11.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, honestly, you probably were. Jeff.
I was like,
I just looked it up on my phone. Joop was a top seller in 1982.
Oh man, I wasn't in that long.
I was 1 year old.
That was before my time.
Okay. Hey, with this, with us taking over the Shadows podcast, normally, right, we get to hear an amazing person's story, but we already heard this amazing person's story on an earlier episode of this podcast. So we decided to just kind of llama it up a little bit, and we're gonna just have a conversation, man. So this is an amazing podcast, and you guys you've been on it, and there's a lot of work that goes behind podcasts that a lot of people don't really fully comprehend. But let's start at the beginning, man. What inspired you to start this podcast, Bodie?
I had been thinking about it for a while. I'd want to do some sort of podcast, and I just couldn't put my finger on what I wanted the topic to be. And I was thinking leadership concepts, different, possibly different books that have been read, because that's been one thing I've been really big on as well, and kind of stole a little page out of your book with that, with trying to knock out 30 per year. But yeah, I was just trying to toss around some ideas on things to actually do one about, and then had one kind of set up kind of a similar format to what the Llamas are doing, but I was like, other people do that so much better than I could do it. So I need to make mine a little bit more unique. So I started thinking about just unique stories. Everybody's got a different story. And it was actually when I went on your podcast, is when the wheels really got turning with it, because I had never had any experience with a podcast. I had listened to podcasts, but I had no idea what the setups looked like. Oh my gosh, I had no idea like the labor that goes into it for one episode.
Neither do I.
So,
thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
I remember going on and doing the episode with you guys, and when I finished, I remember I asked Joe. I remember asking you about it. I was like, I need some pointers like on how to do this, and you started talking to me about Anchor and We both had the little Anchor reels running at the beginning of our episodes, but yeah, Anchor's really easy. That helped out a lot, but the time that goes into editing. So yeah, there was I didn't know all the nuts and bolts that go into it, but I kind of wrapped my head around, let's stick with everybody has a unique story. If that's the case, you've got unlimited potential on episodes that you can pump out. And yeah, that's kind of what got it going.
You know what I like about your podcast is from what I've been listening to and just working with you over the past, man, how long? It's been a long time, Bodie. We've been connected. I mean, through Llama Lounge stuff and podcast stuff for over a year now. You didn't ask permission to do any of this stuff. And I find a lot of, like, if you ever follow some of these podcast Facebook pages, people are always like, hey, I want to do a podcast on this. What do you think? And they're trying to get feedback from people and trying to find their niche. And what I found is, I'm like, dude, it's your podcast. Do what you want with it. Why are you asking others for permission about what it should be like? And I get it. People are looking for advice because they want a successful podcast. But I mean, as long as you're doing it the way you want to do it, and that's going to make it successful. So
yeah, at some point you got to send it. At some point you got to send it. Yeah. And that's what some of those questions that they ask about, like 50 different microphones and everything else. You're like, are you actually going to start a podcast? Are you going to do it?
Yeah.
See, it rolls back to Limp Bizkit again. Do it my way.
Do it your way. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. So that's an interesting name. I know people always ask us about our name, the Llama Lounge, and we have to explain it a lot because it's not as cool as some of the other ones like lions and tigers and bears or whatever people are naming their podcast after. Yours is the Shadows, right? And you do a couple of different offshoots as well. But where did the name the Shadows come from? Shadows podcast.
We were thinking about something about a mask. I was in my head, I was envisioning like a luchador mask
Libre?
Or something. Some sort of mask, because like we take off our mask, we put on this facade at times, but no one really knows like deep down our stories that we've gone through. So I was kind of throwing around some ideas with that, and just kind of settled on the Shadows. And it was, we all have shadows, we all have those dark moments in our lives, and they follow us throughout. And they're constant reminders. You try to run from them, they're still going to be there, but we overcome them. And there's always that light that we strive to get to. And no matter how bright that light gets, that shadow seems, larger than life. But then when you're in your darkest moments, you feel like no one's there with you. But those shadows, those memories still are there. Constant reminders of what you've been through, the battle scars. And that kind of sums up, the podcast as a whole. I actually think the logo, which over here,
it's a cool logo.
Yeah, one of my buddies, Alex Morales, he was in Comm Squadron with me for a while in Germany, and we were actually at tech school together too. And really good artist. I reached out to him and asked him to kind of whip something together, and he came up with that concept from the original Shadows comic from back in the 30s and 40s.
Okay.
And if you look it up, it's actually got a man's face with the hat and the jacket. But he replaced the man's face with the eagle. And he's like, oh, it kind of symbolizes the military. But at first he had these god-awful Seahawk colors.
Oh, man. This is where your stuff started going wrong.
Yeah. Hey, this has been a great episode of the Shadows podcast. Tune in next week.
His wife's a Seahawks fan, so he sends me this logo with like the neon green.
A smart woman.
And I was like, it looks like Pete Carroll threw up on a BMT shirt. And I was like, we gotta revamp it. So we started going with the red and black. And and the cool thing was in that comic, he's a vigilante, but he's actually a radio host by day. And I was like, oh, how fitting, doing podcasts. There's the microphone in there as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
But yeah, and then we, like you said, we had a couple of little spin-offs of it since then.
Yeah, I like that, man. I really do, because, just the different analogies you can use with the shadow. And it's very common for us as humans that, we got this thing that's a shadow. It might have some of the darker parts of us, or some of the things that we're not really proud of, or whatever else it might be, but you got to accept it. You can't run away from it. There's no running away from that shadow, right? So once you accept it, you can start, embracing it. embrace the good things that come with that shadow. And I think that's a great perspective. And I think it's something that people need to hear. And I love your show. Some of the stories I've heard on there have been amazing. Some of the guests that you've had have been just phenomenal, and a wide range of types of people on there. It's been wild.
Yeah. When we first started, it would have been easy just to line up military personnel just right and left and have their stories. But we wanted it to be very diverse. And some of our best episodes, I mean, if you were to sit there and look at each of them and the amount of downloads and everything, it's all over the place. There's no formula. There's no, oh, they love athletes, or wow, they really love military. It's our highest rated ones, or, you know, if I were to say like our top 5, they're all different, different. So diverse with the group of guests that we have. And, you know, we like to keep people guessing too with what we got. And I think coming up, you know, we've got like a comedian, we've got more athletes coming up, more military members, more authors, motivational speakers. And it just goes to show every single person out there, regardless of what they're doing, has a unique story to tell.
Yeah. And, you know, the great thing, not to get too, you know, philosophical, but when we, you know, going back to the shadows concept, I mean, you can't have a shadow without light. Right. And so some people can carry that shadow and stay in the darkness. But I think what most people can get out of your show is when people are sharing their story, whatever their adversity or anything that they overcame, that they're moving towards that light. Exactly. And that's always beneficial for anybody. And what I do like about yours is it's not a consistent theme as far as the type of person that's on there. Like you mentioned, you got everybody. And so my question, how are you deciding, or how are you reaching out to these different folks? And do you just like, you know, spam everybody email, or like hit up everybody on LinkedIn, or how do you decide who you want to have on the show?
Yeah, a lot of social media stalking, you know? No, it's honestly, when we first got started, I had Joe, I had Shante McMillan lined up, who I connected with through Instagram. And I believe I was going to record my story, but that was it. And I was like, wow, how in the world am I going to get more guests than this?
Yeah.
And I thought this is going to be a really short series, but through connections, I mean, you guys have hooked me up with some phenomenal people. And I think that's the cool thing too, is it's like this little podcast group, this little inner circle of people with like the Shay Sparks and the
tribe,
Scott Masons. Yeah. And it's so funny because, you know, now one person connects me to someone. I don't know if y'all have had this happen before, but you'll get on here and you'll connect with someone and you're like, hey, technical difficulty. But you'll connect with someone and you're like, who connected us again?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I have that a lot, but then it's like, it's crazy because all these people are scattered out across the world, but they seem to know each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. So yeah, I just started growing that circle. And then Batista was very instrumental early in getting some of our guests on here through his connections with MVP over in Vegas. And just reaching out to people on social media and asking them, you know, telling them the concept of our podcast and kind of making a pitch to them. And then usually they'll jump on here. We'll do I think I've had a pre-meeting with just about every single guest that I've had on the show.
That's cool. Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I'm sold. I'll do it. Absolutely.
So you were on. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I think a lot of people don't really think about that pre-meeting thing and how important it is, because when you have that pre-meeting, especially if it's somebody you haven't met, but even if it is somebody that you know, it's still beneficial just to kind of not just set up the agenda or what you're going to talk about, but just get to know them as a person. Because if you're just trying to cold call somebody, get them on a podcast, get them in and out, that relationship doesn't build. And you're actually shorting yourself of a huge benefit of even doing this, is actually building those relationships with people. And I love it. When you talked about how like the connection is, right? So met Shay, so got a bunch of connections from Shay all through Kansas City and all through that Midwest area down there. Next thing you know, get connected to VP, who connects me to Frank Agan who's all up in the Cleveland area. Now I'm like in the Ohio area. So then you start meeting all these people up there. Next thing you know, you get connected to Scott Mason, and then you get connected to everybody on the East Coast. It's just, it's pretty cool when you actually just map it out. Coast. Yep. Yeah. It's pretty awesome when you start mapping it all out.
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny to me is because you were on Jerry Dugan's Beyond the Rut podcast, and I'm thinking, yeah. And Jerry's like, yeah, I met him through Shay. I'm like, wait, we didn't connect him. Like I thought that. I'm like, Bodie's our guy, not Shay. No, but and it turned out, I think Shay did connect you and Jerry, right?
She did. But that was like Shay and I were having dinner with Caleb, and she's like, I connected with Nina, and I was like, oh, you've connected with Nina, and she's like, yeah, about that. You should have made that connection, but Roderick had to do it. And so they were giving me crap for it, but it's like, wait, I didn't, are you sure I didn't make that connection?
I just assumed that at some point I reached out to Jerry and said, oh, you should get Bodie on the show. I guess not. Maybe I didn't. I
think we recorded like the same day, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
I think that's what it was. His Facebook post. It was like boom, boom.
Yeah, I was doing and I don't know when he's going to post that. He does a good job of batch recording. Mm-hmm. So he'll record like 13 in one day, and then he takes, the next 13 weeks to
that's another thing
edit
too,
them and stuff. Yeah.
That's really helped is the batch recordings.
Mm-hmm.
It helps, but at the same time, if you get too far ahead, like I do sometimes, it's like, hey, I haven't forgot about you. Your episode's coming out, but I like to do the batch recordings. I usually have like 2 to 3 months ahead of time. Full of batch so I can preview which ones are coming up. I let the guests know typically when their episode is going to drop, and that's something that's really helped me out, because if I was going just week by week trying to get it done, I would be struggling.
We're trying to, I know for us we kind of balanced that out, because we did batch a whole bunch, and then we're pretty far ahead. And then it started catching back up, and a lot of it when I deployed, just the bandwidth wasn't there. But there's some benefits to it, but then there's also like some drawbacks. Like if you record something so long ago, right? There's things change, or you talked about something, maybe a specific topic that might not be as relevant, by the time you actually release the episode. And then some people really like to come on the episode in a timely fashion, because they want to discuss something that they're going to be putting out pretty soon. And if you push that out too far, then it's like it's old news, So there's some of that. When we talk about just like timeless concepts like leadership and just overall resilience and stuff, that not too big of an issue. But it's there. And also the other thing that comes with batching too much at a time is you got a lot of editing to do. Like you're gonna
one of our early episodes where Batista was hosting with me, and I told Batista, I said, hey, this episode's going to get released in like February. He's like, sweet, got it. So right when we start recording, he's like, all right, rapid fire questions. My first question, Christmas is right around the corner. And I'm like, oh. And so I had to scrap the whole rapid fire question. And then it was throughout the episode, he was just in a Christmas spirit. He kept asking Christmas questions, and I kept having to cut stuff during the editing. So yes, it was very painful to have to go back and do that.
Or you record so many in one day that by the time you're on like the 8th guest, you totally forgot who you're talking to, and you're so confused about, well, tell us about your book, such and such. You're like, oh, that was a different guest. Oh man,
Or you're tired. You're just really tired at that
It's like teaching. It's like you're in front of an audience all day. Yeah.
You get with the first one, you're like, hey, welcome to the Shadow. By like that 8th one, you're like, all right, everybody, welcome to the Shadows podcast.
It's like, how come we didn't have that much energy? That was at the end of the day. At the end of the day. But I actually had that happen to me with a guest who happened to probably do a bunch of podcasts that same day. Like they were podcast hopping, being interviewed on multiple podcasts. And they're like, yeah, that book that you brought up earlier. And I was like, I didn't bring up a book, but I was like, let's go with it. Yeah. That book that I brought up earlier. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. I was like, yeah, the one I had. Yeah. What about it? But yeah, that happens pretty often too. But hey, so, your podcast, I mean, you've had some just amazing guests. I mean, Nikita Koloff, to to Zach Bitter, to Shante McMillan. I mean, these are just such a broad spectrum of guests. What were some of the most memorable moments that you may have had with some of your guests?
Well, the ones you just listed right there, like Zach Bitter's got me running more. Like
Mm.
really, he's.
Oh, I
legit
wasn't
got me
doing it
running
for you. I didn't do it for you.
You helped, but he runs like 90 more miles than you a day. So
yeah, that's true.
So you didn't let me finish either. Him and my very first guest, they were very instrumental.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Shantae was really cool because she was kind of that first, big guest that we got that I had no connection with prior to. So that was a really big one with her, and still keep in contact with her
Cool.
to this day. And then Nikita Koloff was really cool for me because I remember as a kid watching him, and then for me sit there interviewing him for a podcast, and it's kind of like this is really cool. Like little 6 or 7 year old version of me was watching him on television. Now I'm sitting here doing an interview with him. But I think the one, I hate to say like one guest stood out more than any other, but I think our rebound series in March really stands out to me because of a lot of those stories were national. Jim Valvano, his story, his ESPY speech that he had, and connecting with Jamie, who's just amazing. She is amazing. And then, like Jeff Fryer and the whole Hank Gathers story. And just being on the court with Hank Gathers when that happened, and Dr. Lenice Bias and her strength, and I mean, just mental toughness that she has just to lose 2 children. And I mean, even my mother, who lost a daughter at 14 years old, for her, she's like, oh my gosh, hearing her story, I just really admire her for everything she's been through. But one of the really cool ones was Chad Porter. Chad Porter. And, he's now doing motivational speaking. He just spoke he spoke, I believe, early in the year for the Clemson Tigers team and Buffalo Bills. And just hearing like the graphic details of his story and what he must have been going through. That's the one where I just sat here. I felt like I didn't even have to ask any questions as he just told it to me. It was tough to digest, but his humor is incredible. That he still has that outlook on life even after the cards that he's been dealt.
Yeah,
I think those are some of the best ones when you, as the host, you really don't have to do a lot of talking, right? I mean, you just kind of throw the prompters out there and then let the guests, because your show is about the guest. I mean, it's their individual stories, and that's always incredible. And you brought up Bias, and I remember I grew up in DC in the 80s, and Len Bias was the guy at Georgetown, and it was in that area. So that was when I saw that she was on there. I was like, how is he getting these people? like what kind of connections is this guy making? Yeah.
She actually asked me if she could get a poster of the cover art with
nice
that I did for it and stuff. So that was really cool having her reach back out to me for that. But yeah, it's some of them been kind of pinch yourself moments, like, wow, I'm getting to talk to this person. This is pretty cool, and getting to hear the story firsthand from them.
Yeah, I tell you. So you started yours sort of like in the mix of the pandemic going on, right? September. I mean, and I think the great thing about that is, and I tell people all the time, if you didn't come out of the pandemic like with new ideas or being invigorated about, nothing's impossible. You know what I'm saying? You and even if you don't succeed in that area, there's no way that you can go, you know what, I'm horrible at this, I should have never tried it. No, that I'll say March of this year really gave free rein to people to just tap into the creative side and test it out. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, it didn't. But in the past, when we first started Llama Lounge, ours was all articles. We were doing blogs for a couple of years. And I don't know how many people, they didn't want to do a blog. They didn't want to write an article because they were fearful of how it was going to come across or their skills or abilities to write. And we always told them, hey, we're going to edit it. We won't make you look bad. But when 2020 happened and COVID hit, I mean, that just kind of opened it up for people to just do what they wanted to do and let them, express themselves in a lot of different ways. How has it worked for you as far as the pandemic? Obviously, I think that probably sparked the concept of starting a podcast, but since we're sort of, like you mentioned earlier, transitioning out of it, how has it changed the way you do things?
Well, before I would have probably never started a podcast.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. I probably wouldn't have. And even though I'd been thinking about it, it would have still been on the back burner in my mind. But we had to start teaching March, right when everything kicked off. Was it like the 11th, March 11th, I think is when it was like officially considered like this worldwide pandemic stuff started shutting down. I think it was like that second week of March.
Yeah.
By the end of that month, we had to teach virtual here at the course.
Yeah.
And all the PMEs were basically put on hold, and it was, well, we still got to push people through. We still need instructors. We still need supervisors. We still need this person, that person. So we started learning about, we're like, what's this thing called? Teams and Zoom and WebEx and all these different. So we started playing around, testing them out. And then, our commandant was talking to us, and he's like, I want y'all not just to teach, but I want you to get out there and do other things as well. So I started venturing out, and some of the courses that I've been certified on, I started teaching them on Teams and Zoom. And it got to where I was really comfortable with, this setup and being able to get on Zoom and hit record. And then, I got fancy and got a Yeti mic and a ring light and, a nice camera and everything. And but
the Yetis pick up everything.
But I think now, like, transitioning out of the pandemic, I think you're absolutely right. I think that it gave you every opportunity to try something new, to try something different, to adjust, to make changes. And I feel like personally, it didn't just help me out for the podcast. I felt like it helped me out teaching as well. Like, I feel like I'm a better instructor now because of everything that we've been through, kind of the silver lining and being able to be more flexible. I could teach in front of people live, or I could jump in front of 300 people on a webcam and sit there and teach to them. So I definitely think it helped out.
Yeah. I think that's a huge one too. Like, just like a lot of people don't realize that whatever it might be, it might not be podcasting, but whatever you take on that's new, there's a lot of peripheral learning that occurs, right? And with the podcasting, or when you're transitioning from, like, in your example, transitioning from just strictly classroom teaching to being able to teach both ways on virtual, and then like what I did one time was basically a hybrid of both. There was some in the class, right? A mixture. And that was even just a whole different perspective of learning. And, but you're gaining so many different skills while you're doing that, right? Like, I didn't know how to set up this thing to make it like point perfectly in the right spot while I'm teaching a class, trying to move around the class, but not get out the camera view. These are things that it kind of helps you almost like, and that specific example kind of gives you some spatial awareness, right? I mean, like, there's just some things that you're kind of honing and learning, and it's a lot of stuff that it wasn't deliberate or intentional with those skills, but you gain a lot in those things. I always call it like the Mr. Miyagi thing. You're painting the fence, and you're gaining some other type of skill while you're doing that, and some strength too, right? So a lot of stuff happens like that. And to Scott's point, if you didn't grow, or you're exactly the same or worse after the pandemic than you were before, then that was, that was a failure.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it was weird because both of you are familiar with the 5 Voices and 5 Gears lessons. I'd never taught 5 Gears in person because I really started teaching. I built the lesson, started teaching it. I think it was like April or May of last year. And so probably about a month ago, they asked me to head over to Maxwell and teach it live. And I was like, okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I emailed, my slides to the person hosting it. And I was driving over there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never taught this in person.
What do I do with my hands?
How the hell am I going to teach this in person? And I started kind of freaking out. I was like, I've taught this thing over 50 times, but it's never been live. And I walked in there, and the computer was really slow to start up, and everything was going wrong. And I was like, this is supposed to happen virtual. This is not supposed to happen. We always think like, I'm going to go in residence and everything's going to work perfectly. But I had to adjust, and actually finished teaching it, and I felt pretty good. But I was like, "Ooh, that was rough." I wasn't expecting that, because usually I'm just sitting right there clicking through the slides. But having to kind of already know what was on the slides and not necessarily read off of them, but just kind of glance at it and speak to it. It was a change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking of just the different types of learning that you got, what else have you been gaining through like this whole podcast experience, that maybe were not things that you expected to gain from, from this whole experience?
Well, I've pretty much got a place to stay anywhere I travel.
That's good.
Yes,
good.
yeah.
I think we mentioned it. It's kind of like, you remember Rampage, the game on like the arcade game, and then it turns where you would like beat a state and they would like pound, and then it would turn to state blue. I feel like I've been doing that, kind of going through like, well, I got a place to stay in California. And
there you go. Yeah.
Kansas City. Definitely the connection piece, definitely established some really cool connections, and it's helped me out with my job here.
Yeah.
We have symposiums or stuff coming up and I need someone to speak. It's like, oh yeah, I've got a Rolodex of people here that have been on the podcast. And also I've learned so much about so many different things. Like I can't even sit here and list off, and it's probably the same with, I mean, just look at the different topics that y'all cover on Llama Lounge. I mean, you can't help but to learn from every single one of these people.
Sure.
And I think the coolest part has been when a student or someone that I mentor or somebody comes to me for some sort of advice, I can recall a certain episode, The Shadows, and someone had been through something similar. We've actually got a couple of episodes canned that are coming up after this one, but just real life stuff like PTSD, mental health awareness. And you hear these stories, and I mean, as an instructor, I'd never had any of these stories to share with people. And now I can say, oh yeah, somebody else I know has been through something similar. This is what they did to overcome it. And then also, this is what they're doing now. And it gives that person, some hope as well.
And sometimes you can learn so much more from a conversation between 2 or 3 people than you can from a PowerPoint presentation and a lecture. You know what I mean? So for instance, when I was doing corporate training, we had a company that we were putting together some management training, some training for their managers. And I was really trying to explain, I had some good content on emotional intelligence. And I said, you know what? I want you guys to listen. And I plugged the Llama Lounge, and I gave an episode of a podcast where we had a guest, and Joe was talking to that guest. They were talking about emotional intelligence, and they walked away with like, I get it now. I understand what emotional intelligence is, rather than read definitions and study this material. Hearing these 2 people talk about emotional intelligence and how it's affected them and how it's enhanced their leadership abilities, and I was like, man, it's a new way. It's a new level of learning that I think we could all benefit from.
That's actually, one of the driving forces for us when we're doing this podcast. And I think about it all the time, is like,
this podcast, our podcast,
and this podcast too. I'm sure. Yeah.
I don't even know what show we're on right now.
Yeah, I know. I mean, his studio is nicer than ours, though. So usually that should remind us, but we're still messing this up.
Do you have any drinks in the refrigerator? Is there?
I think he probably has some of that. Yeah, he probably has some of that fizzy beer stuff that's not really beer, like seltzer beer or whatever.
Oh, that's fine.
It has Smirnoff. Zimas.
That was actually from Scott's day.
Axe body spray and Zimas.
Yeah.
Yep. Welcome to the shadows.
But I don't even know where I was going with that. But another thing that I would say, though, gaining the whole another thing that I gained, and I think it was just something that I really didn't think was going to happen, was on this doing the podcast, meeting so many amazing people across the country. Man, it kind of gave me like a new reinvigorated faith in humanity. And I know that sounds kind of like this huge thing, but sometimes when you're stuck in your own little bubble of people, and you talk to the same people over and over again, you have your bubble, but then when you look out and you're like, man, are we the only ones like this? That really do want to grow and help people and this and that. But then when you start meeting all these people across the world, and then you feel like you're the dumbest person in the room in a lot of these conversations. You're like, man, there's a lot of greatness out there. And it just forces you to grow. And also just, there's a lot of optimism and hope that, that kind of sets in as well.
Or, like, not to kind of beat the pandemic like a dead horse, but during that time frame, I mean, there were a lot of people struggling and not knowing how to get out of issues and not knowing how to deal with it. And, misery loves company. And so instead of finding solutions, you get a lot of people that just kind of pile on and be bitter together. And what I think the great thing about podcasting, if you can search the right podcast and like the Shadows and like Llama Lounge and Beyond the Rut and Shays and all these different podcasts out there, like you said, Joe, you're going to find people out there that are thriving. That and we need that inspiration. We need that example in some cases to help us get out of whatever we're facing. I'd rather be excited and kind of motivated that there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to do something good, rather than hang out with the miserable people who want to just say woe is me and treat the world like it's the worst thing in the world.
So I remember what it was before Scott just totally interrupted and started talking about the Zima in the fridge.
So Bodie, one thing I was thinking about is
so it was actually one of the things that drive me wanting to continue to do the Llama Lounge podcast and look for those different types of guests is that we're not always blessed with great leadership. We're not always blessed with leadership that wants to invest in us. They might be awesome, but maybe they don't have the time to invest in us. And I often think about that when we're putting together episodes, because I want that staff sergeant, tech sergeant, senior airman, whoever, maybe a master sergeant or a young officer that, is seeking some of that growth that just doesn't have it right within their AOR right now and their area of responsibility. They don't have it right there. Right. And they could turn on an episode and like Scott said, they can listen to emotional intelligence and be like, oh, I want to know a little bit more about that. And they can gain something from there. And then they can go study their own, So on the Shadows podcast, what are some of those driving factors? What is it that you really want people to get? What's the message that you want people to take from the show?
So I had someone actually reach out to me through Facebook Messenger, and they checked out a couple of the episodes, and they really liked the fact that we were talking about topics such as like mental health, such as PTSD, such as, suicide prevention, things that people don't necessarily talk about, or there's a bad stigma attached to it. And, I've been very open on the Shadows and said, hey, I go to mental health. And I have nothing bad to say about it. And, having people reach out to me afterwards and saying like, oh, that's so cool to hear you say that on your podcast, which is going to go out to anyone who wants to listen to it. For you to
millions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Slow down.
This episode for sure. Millions.
We got you, Bodie. We got you.
But, just for that many people for you to be that vulnerable and be like, hey, you're putting yourself out there. That gives me hope. And now so many of my friends that I talk to, I had no idea that even they were going to mental health, and they sit there and reach out to me and they're like, okay, now I feel like I got this connection with you and I can sit here and talk to you about it. And then even like, I think one of the best examples I had was, it's not necessarily just the listeners, it's our guests too. Like Jamie Valvano, I've stayed in contact with her, and I think it was like around her dad's birthday. I was messaging her and she said, I want to thank you because through your podcast and my connection with you, you showed me the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
And what you can get out there to people and what you can do to help people and how you can celebrate those moments, the power of those moments, the power of those memories that you've had throughout your life, and not necessarily try to put them, like in a closet somewhere. So that was really cool hearing that from not just listeners, but from our guests as well. And then even myself, I learned something from every single episode. And I don't know if the two of you have this, but it's crazy how like a guest can find you. You know how when you read that book at just the right time in your life,
right?
And you're like, wow, this book just found me right now when I needed it. I've had so many guests where I'm like, oh, I've needed this knowledge that they're just passing down to me right now at this exact moment. And it's really helped me out a lot.
Yeah.
I find myself sometimes with our podcast, and not for egotistical purposes, but listening to episodes over and over again.
Yeah.
And I'll do that at work sometimes. Even Shadows podcast and Beyond the Rut and some of these other podcasts, when I'm at work and I'll have it playing and I'm like, just reliving the stories is beneficial, but sometimes I'm picking up things that I didn't hear the first go around, or it's hitting me a little bit different. And it's good, strong, solid reinforcement, because sometimes you hear the story and you're like, okay, I got it, one and done. But I think the great thing about podcasts is you can go back and revisit them and connect with them again. And I think we've had, Joe, if we had people that wanted to quote the podcast before, or quote the blog site before, as far as they're writing papers and stuff like that, and they want
yeah, for sure, yeah, absolutely, and their college courses and stuff like that, I've actually got messages saying that. Yeah.
That's really cool. It shows you're making an impact right there.
Yeah.
So you great point there, making an impact. What is it for you? I mean, what's the driving force for you, Bodie?
With anyone who does a podcast, the two of you can probably vouch for this as well. It gets to the point where you ask yourself that,
why am I doing
like,
this?
it's
a lot of work.
You're like, this is so much work, and it's a lot of work, like, what's the, big picture here? But for me, the driving force, each episode, if it helps one person, it helps one person. Downloads and stuff are great, but it's when you start to get that feedback from people specifically who are like, wow, I listened to this episode. It's really cool when they check out an episode of a guest that they think they're not going to have, any connection with whatsoever. Like, one of the best examples was like Casey Berman. He actually came on and was like, I don't think anybody's going to want to listen to my story. He's like, I don't think I have a unique story whatsoever. But everybody's been in that job at some point in time where you're like, I got to make a change. I feel like, or you've been in some situation in your life where you're like, I don't think this is for me. Either your parents have wanted you to do something, or coworkers, or what have you, but you just decide, all right, I'm going to walk away and make a change. People actually reached out to me after his episode and were like, I didn't think I was going to get a whole lot from that one.
Yeah.
But that's such a relatable message. And hearing his story really helped me with where I am in my life. And so as long as it can continue to make a connection with one person, at least each episode, we're serving our purpose.
Yeah.
Do you ever get the, oh, you're that Bodie guy? Has that happened to you yet?
I'm not Joe, where it's like you go into a deployment, people are like, hey, Llama Lounge.
Hey, the Llama dude.
But I've had people come through the course and they're like, oh, you've got that podcast thingy. But
it's pretty good. The thingy.
Yeah. And you're like, and it's on the test. So you got to
do one with the bird, or it's the Undertaker, or whatever that is behind you. But yeah, they I've had people come through here and tell me that, and that's pretty cool. I take that thingy as the Shadows podcast.
That is cool.
I was actually joking with my daughters. I said that, when we were planning the Disney vacation, I was like, it's really gonna kind of screw up the vacation for a lot of families, because we're going to be sitting in line and people are going to be like, oh my gosh, that's the Shadows podcast.
That's definitely going to happen for sure.
Let's get a picture. And then it's going to take away from the experience, and Goofy and Mickey.
Yeah. People are going to step out of the Star Wars line just to take a picture with you.
They're going to miss their call time on the ride.
You might need to go in
the
disguise.
Disney characters are going to they're going to get out of their costumes to come hang out.
Well, Goofy was eyeing me because I was taking away from his experience. So there's just going to be a mess.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, shout out to Casey Berman, man. His story is definitely worth listening to, right? And dude's awesome. But it's a cool point that you bring up. When you listen to people's stories, like the ones that they share on the Shadows podcast, it might not, you might, if you're sharing it, or somebody might even read the tagline on it and be like, I don't know if that's really going to relate to me, but typically those stories relate in such a broader scope. Because if you think about like Casey's, so I love what he says too. He was like, I became a lawyer because I'm Jewish and I don't like blood. Right. I mean, like, that's why, right. I knew I didn't like blood. So so it was just it's automatic. It's law. I become lawyer. Right. But he wasn't happy doing it. So he transitioned out. But just the concept of transitioning out and helping people find their unique genius and whatever that might be, that's well, is that something that the military needs to have, like when they're transitioning out the military or when you're separate, whatever it might be?
Yeah.
He actually has a formula to help people figure out what is for them using their own skills, which is pretty relevant to anybody, right? Anybody in any type of transition. So I do think that's really cool. And that's, once again, like that peripheral learning. I think you listen to an episode, you hear some cool conversations, and then you get something you didn't even realize you were going to get out of it. And that happens a lot with the Shadows podcast. So I just want to tell you, man, I think what you're doing is awesome.
Yeah.
And you need to keep it up, because these stories that come from people who you would never, maybe consider talking to, like, how many stories do you think that you've actually had on your podcast that their own friends don't even know that story? Right. People close to them have never actually heard the story because for whatever reason, they just haven't had the time. It never came up in the topic of discussion. And they're learning more about maybe even their own family member that they're listening to on a podcast. Like, wow, I didn't know that you thought about it, stuff like
They'll
that.
say that on there. They'll say,
yeah,
not a lot of people know this story, but
yeah. It's amazing. We had that with Thunder Meek when he was on our podcast. There's a bunch of coworkers had no idea that he was born in a Vietnamese work camp.
Yeah.
They had no idea, and so it, sharing those stories is real important for understanding and also growth.
Well, even your episode was the first one that really allowed me to see that, because people who had been stationed with you, they listened to your story and they were automatically messaging me like, oh my gosh, I had no idea about this, or I had no idea about that.
I didn't even know Joe was Korean until that episode.
Yeah, I know, right?
I didn't know he was a Cardinals fan until I heard
right, yeah. Never.
That's the problem right there.
Bodie, where are you from?
Next question.
Yeah, let's go here. Where are you from? Is it Arizona? Is it actually Arizona?
It's not actually Arizona, but
because nobody's actually from Arizona.
Nobody's from Arizona. I lived in Arizona and I was a season ticket holder for a couple of years.
And that's where he did the frost tips and the Axe body spray and the affliction shirts. That's where he got that from.
Yeah.
They sell Zimas at University of Phoenix Stadium.
Well, speaking of confusion in sports teams, I have to redeem myself, because I think I said earlier that Len Bias played for Georgetown. And it was Maryland. So my bad. I apologize.
Yeah.
Right across
same area.
We knew what you're talking about. Yeah.
But it was a big story in junior high. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just had I was thinking about that. I was like, wait a second. No, he didn't.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you said
Andover.
something about that, Scott, because there's like 10 people listening right now that are so mad.
Yeah,
they're like, no.
They stopped listening at that point. It was
they're Maryland alum.
Maryland Terrapin fans. They turned off the episode and they're like, Bodie and they did not catch him on that.
Yeah. What? Check him right then and there.
Well, I was listening to you say it and I was like, well, it's my show. I'll edit that out.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing it up again and making it even more hard for him to edit it out now. Thanks.
Gary Williams and all these people that were listening, they're turning it off right now.
At the end of this episode, when you go to edit it, it'll be like Joe and I at the opening, and then you don't hear from me the rest of the episode. It's just like there's some weird gaps there. It's just Joe and Bodie talking and some weird silence areas. I don't get it.
All right. So hey, Bodie, we're wrapping up this episode, right?
And hey, it's been great having you on your own show too.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. Thanks for coming over.
This chair feels different.
Yeah, we'll buy you another bag of Funyuns because Scott went to town on those.
Oh, good.
But we can't let you out without our rapid fire.
Yes. Wait, do you have new questions, Joe? Because he's done.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just making sure.
Scott, I've done this before, right? All right, Bodie. So, question number 1: what's your preferred leadership style and why?
Preferred leadership style. I'm going to pull a page out of PME. Transformational.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely believe you got to be different. You've got to basically be yourself too, and I think that goes a long way. I think that Chief Gaylor in an episode of Shadows podcast said that really well.
Gaylor, man.
Of this episode of this show, yeah.
but yeah, he brought up a good point. He said, I'm good at playing Chief Gaylor. I suck at playing everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too many times we try to be someone else. We try to emulate a different leader. We try to emulate a different supervisor. We read a book on a coach or a great military leader, and we try to emulate that as opposed to just being you. Mm-hmm. And I think, when I started supervising, I wanted to be that supervisor that really changed my career. And I sucked at it. And there was a lot of trial and error that I learned throughout the process. But, painting an optimistic picture of people as to what they can do, seeing untapped potential in people, getting them to realize it. I think that is a big thing. And, I definitely have started to see the biggest difference between coaching and mentoring here in the past. I mean, throughout this pandemic, I've been studying that a lot, and not necessarily showing people what to do, but kind of like motivating them, sparking that in them. So I definitely want to be that one that, when people get up there, and I mean, how cool somebody does a retirement ceremony and they get up there and they say, I'm here today because of Tripp Bodenheimer and everything he did for me. Just try to be different.
Yeah. Scott's been trying to be like Dan Snyder all this time, and it hasn't been working out for him.
I'm Joe Gibbs.
Joe Gibbs. Have a NASCAR team.
Yeah.
Joe Gibbs prior to the race car.
All right. Question number 2. What is a book, podcast, or show that you've consumed lately that you want to share?
Llama Lounge.
Well, besides the Llama Lounge.
You know what? Shay Sparks has a really good podcast.
She does.
Her podcast is phenomenal.
The Power of Investing in People.
Power of Investing in People is really, really good. Also, Beyond the Rut, you mentioned that earlier. Jerry Dugan, he has a very good, there's so many good podcasts out there. Hero Front podcast.
Josh White.
Yeah, with Josh. But the one book that I actually just talked about the other day, what is it? The Power of Habits.
Yeah.
Atomic Habits or Power?
No, Charles Duhigg's Power of Habit.
Yep. Power of Habit. Phenomenal book. That's actually one of my favorite books. And, the cycle that it talks about as to why we do things a certain way. And I mentioned it in here, but Power of Moments.
Yeah, that is a great book too. That actually helped give a lot of understanding on why we celebrate moments and why we should continue to celebrate moments. So great book. Yeah. Awesome. All right. Question number 3. What is the most important thing you do each morning?
I'm basically my grandfather at this point in my life. I brew coffee, walk the dog, and read a book.
I thought you were going to say wake up.
but most important thing I do each morning, honestly, work out. Work out. And if I don't, it's like I'm missing that cup of coffee. And I feel like I'm dragging all day long. So we'll go that. Wake up.
Yeah, that's pretty important.
Yeah, in that order. All right.
Drink coffee, read a book. Yeah.
Where are you like a home gym guy? I think I've seen your gym on Facebook,
Body by Bodie. Yeah,
Body by Bodie. Yeah. I've got set of dumbbells, got a squat rack, treadmill, heavy bag. You name it, it's there.
Do you have a routine? Any particular routine, or you just get in there, throw stuff around?
See, now I'm giving secrets away. But no,
he charges people for this guy.
Oh, my bad. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's going to be my next podcast. Is the Body by Bodie.
Body by Bodie.
Shadows extension. No, the mornings I've started running a lot more, and then I do my lifting in the afternoon. But just break it down. It's a body part a day, and I like the challenge of getting in there in the gym. To me, it's like a mental thing. It's like you versus the weights, and they kick your butt every single time.
Yeah. But that means you're doing it right.
Yeah. You come back the next day. Some days I get in there and I'm just like, no, I'm not feeling it. But and right now this time of year, it's very humid outside. It's very
you're in Alabama,
stuffy.
Right?
Yeah. It's very stuffy in that garage. I cannot open the garage door because there's like a whole gang of mosquitoes.
Yeah. Sounds like Corpus Christi.
Oh, and they've been lifting all day and they're just waiting to get their protein from me. So I don't allow them in. So right now, I can walk out there and sit down and just start stretching and I'm already sweating. Yeah. So I love it because I finish up and I'm coming out of a Gatorade commercial.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Have you tried resistance bands yet? Because I bought some for Scott's kids because they've been using it and he hasn't. It's very clear by the way he's looking right now.
I actually do use resistance bands. Yeah.
They're great. It's crazy. They're great when I'm kind of when I'm driving and I have to kind of bungee some things down. I just use the resistance bands. Yeah. Nothing slides around the back of the car.
I tell you what though, garage gym will make you have to like be innovative with how you do things.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it really challenges you. Like I did a workout this morning, but it was a 1,000 rep arm workout.
Dang. Wow. Okay.
Yep. It was tough.
All
You notice we haven't seen his hands this entire episode.
Yeah.
No,
He probably can't even lift his arms at the moment.
You've had shoulders down this whole episode.
He's just like sliding his arms around like,
Yeah.
I can't lift.
All right. Final question. All right. What is your favorite animal and why is it a llama?
Mm. I mean, that's the easy one. But just going back to the other one, you can't use llama. Favorite animal? That to me, that's an easy question. It's a dog.
Huh.
Because and it actually goes back to an article I read not too long ago about them, to where dogs figure out life quicker than humans.
Mm-hmm.
They're happy. They don't hold grudges.
Mm-hmm.
They get emotional little spurts, but they get it out of their system and they move on to the next thing. They're always happy to see you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're grateful of what you do for them.
Yeah.
They just enjoy, riding down the road. They enjoy everything. They get the purpose of life in, 10 to 15 years as what a human cannot comprehend in about a 70 to 80 year lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it is also
that's actually pretty deep, man. I didn't know how the answer was gonna go.
I knew what I was doing, Scott. I knew it was going to go somewhere good.
well, plus two. If you lock your wife and you lock your dog in a trunk for an hour and you open it up, which one's happy to see you?
Yeah, the dog is gonna be much happier.
Yeah. Unconditional love. Absolutely.
The dog's gonna be like, I thought you were gone.
So happy to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me and Oleg were actually talking about that, how dogs can mentor us by example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to hear Oleg talk about that.
Yeah. Oleg will say something super deep about this whole situation. You thought that was deep. It'll get real deep.
Yeah.
But man, well, Bodhi, thank you for coming on your own podcast. It's been a blast. We welcome you to come back again sometime.
Yeah.
And make sure when we come back, the Funyuns are restocked and there's more Zima, please.
Get some of those peanut butter filled pretzels. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those would be good too.
Yeah. And I'd like M&Ms, but only yellow ones, just yellow ones.
Yeah.
What about music? No more Limp Bizkit. That didn't go over as well.
No. We'll
Maybe like some early 90s pop. Ace of Base or something.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
That's
cool.
Joe's thing.
Counting Crows.
Counting Crows is great.
Counting Crows would be all right.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. All right, brother. Well, to all our listeners of this Shadows podcast, thank you for tuning in once again and listening to us take over Bodhi's podcast.
Well,
and yes.
Where can they find out more about Llama Lounge?
Oh yeah, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can find out about Llama Lounge, Joe and I's podcast. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. You can go to llama-leadership.com. You can look us up on Llama Leadership on Facebook. And from what I've heard, we have an Instagram account. Is that true, Joe?
We do. And sometimes it's updated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good. We do batching on the Instagram thing. Like I wait till a bunch of stuff's out and then I just update it all at one time. Mm-hmm.
And or just follow us on. Does Shadows Podcast have show notes?
Well, we're working that on the website.
Okay. I was gonna say you could check the show notes, but I got to get Bodhi to work on that.
We'll put the links. We'll put all the links you've just mentioned will be there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's how you can get a hold of us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for that opportunity to plug our podcast, and we look forward to you joining us very soon. And to all the listeners, as always,
you wanted to say our
stay healthy.
All the Bodhi's listeners.
Yep, all Bodhi's listeners. Llamas are out, and so is Bodhi.
Yeah, Bodhi's out.